Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Thinking about ways that we can improve our health, one of the most important things we could do is allow ourselves to have a lot of self-compassion. Kind of be a little more forgiving and not so hard on yourself. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a licensed acupuncturist, Chinese medicine expert, and self-care strategist who practices out of Corvallis, Oregon. Coming up at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, she's going to be doing a wonderful inspired class where she's going to be teaching people how to approach what is known as the G of self-compassion. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our special guest, Brody Welch. Brody, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, tell us how you started these classes. What was the need? What was going on where people really needed something like this?
Well, in my clinical practice of Chinese medicine, most of what people are coming in for has to do with how they're living their lives, it is typically not particularly self-compassionate. We live in a culture that encourages people to be constantly overdoing, and so as a consequence, things like getting to bed on time or like making the healthy food that people know that they need in order to stay their healthiest and happiest and most centered selves. Self-care is really going by the wayside, and thinking about really if what we do every day adds up to how we feel, then helping people to really see their basic self-care as something other than selfish. I really saw a need for that.
You know, it's fascinating that people would actually have the thought about approaching this with the attitude of, well, this seems kind of selfish for me to do that. Shouldn't I be reaching out and caring for others? But you can't really do that too well if you don't take care of yourself first. Doesn't that make sense?
Absolutely, and that's really, really easy to logically agree with, and much harder to put into practice when you're a mother of kids or when you are an ultra-confident manager at a company, and you'd much rather wear yourself down than let down somebody on your team or somebody in your family.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's important, I think, for our listeners to come to understand is Chinese medicine. Let's talk really a little bit about that, how this really coincides with what it is that you teach here.
Well, that is a really deep and rich question, and I'll try to answer it. So Chinese medicine, first of all, is this complete system of healthcare that is rooted in the notion of balance, right? That the goal of any acupuncture treatment, which is one of the branches of Chinese medicine, is to balance yin and yang in the body. And so, yin and yang, your listeners have probably heard those terms, and just to define them a little bit, the yang is the name for the archetypal energy that has to do with activity and doing and being productive and movement, warmth, speed, those kinds of things. And yin is going to be the more quiet, restful, peaceful being energy. And so right away, like looking at our culture, we live in a culture that's addicted to yang and doesn't really value yin, right? Like how busy we are is sort of a badge of honor, and that being able to just that, even though people know that, and research has even shown that taking breaks, taking a nap during the day can improve your productivity, getting a massage, these things, little breaks throughout the day make us more productive, but it's still a really hard sell for people. So just the notion philosophically that yin is just as vital as yang in order to keep us healthy and balanced is pretty central to Chinese medicine. But even beyond that, there is sort of much deeper than that. We look at the fact that Chinese medicine is a complete body, mind, spirit system of philosophy, and that the things that keep us stuck in these patterns of overwork and stress are often rooted in these deep beliefs that we have about ourselves, and acupoints, places on the body where we can access these different kind of archetypal energies, are things that people can work with on their own. They can stimulate them with acupressure, with self-massage, with an essential oil, with channeling qi into the point through qigong or meditation. And there's really so many different ways that we can address our own imbalances, whether they stem from physical issues or the way that we're living, or just really deeply rooted thought patterns.
That's fascinating to be able to put all that together and show people how they can actually move to a state of health that they probably weren't used to experiencing before.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's so rewarding too, and often it's like what I just actually got a wonderful email from a former patient last week who wrote to me that she started coming to me for migraine headaches, and over the course of she's this very driven young woman who is working 3 jobs and going to school, and just total like high achiever, kind of the emotional rock of her family, just absolute like wonderful person who was clearly driving herself too hard, and it was leading, she had the physical problems to prove it. She had the migraines, she had hormone imbalances, she had trouble sleeping, and you name it. It was every system pretty much is out of balance. And so working with her to just do things like slowing down and taking a little time each day for herself, showing her a few breathing exercises and a few points that she could work with on her own, starting to kind of carve those grooves of just little things that help to kind of like move her going in a different direction. And sure enough, the migraines went by the wayside as she developed the self-care practice. But this past year, she was hit with this unspeakably horrible, tragic thing that happened, and just the kind of thing that just changes your life irrevocably. And she wrote me this email that she didn't used to be somebody who she thought of as particularly resilient or strong, but that the same self-care practices that she had been introduced to for treating her migraines were like the very thing that were keeping her from totally going off the rails in the face of this really awful crisis that she's trying to navigate with a little kid. And so it was the kind of thing where I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like that's sort of like exactly the opposite of selfish, right? And the sort of perfect notion that our symptoms can actually be our biggest teachers and guides towards like the lives that we could be living and showing up as the strongest version of ourselves, the more emotionally rooted and balanced.
It sounded to me, too, like she was able to achieve a level of emotional intelligence that I don't know that she was used to. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, really, that in order to be self-compassionate, whether it's in our daily actions or whether it's like in our how we talk to ourselves, it requires noticing, right? It requires a mindfulness, and so developing a practice of tuning in and checking in, like how am I talking to myself, and what's guiding my actions right now, like what's motivating me, because a lot of the time the way that we talk to ourselves is nothing like we would ever talk to a friend or expect of another person, but yet we have these expectations for ourselves.
Now, it's really interesting because it seems that you're also working with people in a first-hand way where we hear a lot about how stress is the number one reason that we have a lot of our ailments, and as you just described this story of this lady where she learned to have more self-care, more self-compassion, that the migraine started going away. And I'm sure that you've worked with a lot of people where some of the strangest or more unusual physical symptoms seem to fall away, where they kind of let themselves scratch their head thinking, and that's all there was to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, because the body is an ecosystem, right? When we start, and because, so fundamentally in Chinese medicine, the body is an ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, we have all these different kinds of energy, which we could call yin and yang, or we could call it wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. We could call it spleen chi, kidney chi, heart chi, that kind of thing. Each of those systems has within it physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions to it. And that as we, basically, when we think about how to bring a whole system into balance, it's often a whole bunch of different symptoms that we tie together and look at as actually being the same kind of energy. And so when we're treating one thing, we're treating both the root and the branch being the symptom that sort of someone wants help with, and the root being the kind of the whole pattern that ties various symptoms together. And that so if you've got a garden and it's getting too much sun and you need to keep out the sun and to create a little shade for the plants to really thrive. Like as you create that shade and those plants start to thrive, other plants start to thrive that you didn't even intend. Like that it changes the whole balance of that little ecosystem. And so, yeah, people are often really surprised at how much gets better when we start changing the little things. Because what we do every day in our daily lives, like that's where healing happens. It's like people might get off an acupuncture table and feel fantastic, but that's not necessarily going to last unless they are living in a way that supports that balance, and that the simplest things that people do really add up. So how we breathe, right? How we breathe determines the state of our nervous system. And so, teaching people just how to do that, or how to stretch, how to change the voices in our head to more compassionate ones, or at least to counter them and get that they are not the only way of seeing ourselves.
Now, what are some of the most profound life changes you've seen as you work with people?
Oh, wow.
I know it sounds like you probably have quite a bit of them, but some that really had you standing back and really realizing that the work you're doing not only is effective, but it's fairly profound when you see this happen before you.
Are you talking about acupuncture or
well, just in general, as you've applied what you're talking about here, how you've seen those kinds of changes?
Well, there's the old adage that we have in Chinese medicine that you come in for shoulder pain and you leave with a divorce. It's like people, it's the kind of thing where, like, in exploring a given symptom, it's not about beating it out of existence. It's about understanding why it's there in the first place. And so for a lot of people, in terms of dramatic life changes, people understand, oh, right, this job is really toxic and I'm going to follow my dreams and do something else. Or this relationship really isn't working for me and we need to change the dynamics here, or it's going to continue to, so someone will then do that and then lo and behold, be able to get off their blood pressure medication, or, the kind of thing where someone's dealing with horrible menopausal symptoms and with hot flashes and night sweats and insomnia and all that, and they start doing, a little self-massage and a little breathing exercise, taking some Chinese herbs, and, within a couple of months, all those symptoms are gone. Things that make a huge difference in people's quality of life. I've seen dramatic reductions, like people be able to get off of all kinds of medications that they were on for sleep, for fibromyalgia symptoms, for pain, for, seeing people who are, like, on the verge of being, diabetic, be able to change the numbers in their, their blood sugar levels to within normal limits where it's no longer a concern. And, of course, diabetes and heart disease, metabolic syndrome in general is a huge problem in our country. So there's anxiety, depression, and I've seen people either just no longer have the symptoms or no longer need their medications because the chemistry that we're producing inside our own bodies is super powerful. And it's not this woo-woo thing. It's like, it absolutely, like, how we live our daily lives determines how we feel. And so, digestive issues, hormonal balance, pain, all kinds of things. You name it. There's going to be something dramatic in pretty much every category.
Now, here's what I'd like to talk about. I think it's pretty important, and people can discover more about you by going to BrodieWelch.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's BrodieWelch, and yeah, there's a bunch of free resources there that can get people started on their path if they're interested.
Well, I was on there, and I was kind of searching for your blog, and it was interesting because one of the things that came up, and I thought you might talk about this in a little more detail, but that is the experience that a person has when it comes to guilt. How many people actually live with something like that where it really becomes very detrimental to their health?
Well, it's the kind of thing where that when someone has a difficult time, when someone's holding on to guilt, it can exacerbate conditions like depression or unconscious emotional eating. Obviously depression in and of itself is a health issue. And certainly the behaviors that people engage in when they are feeling guilty to comfort themselves aren't always positive or health producing. So guilt can have a negative effect on people's health and happiness, and that hanging on to not being able to forgive ourselves or to let go of times when we maybe didn't measure up to our own standards can really put a damper on joy. And that, in Chinese medicine, joy is in the dimension of the fire element and the heart. And so, cutting the heart off from its full amount of energy, of qi that it has available, obviously a big deal that can show up usually down the road. It's not like guilt directly translates into heart problems, but certainly, the heart, in order to be emotionally healthy, the heart needs to be able to flow in and out of all of the different emotions. Guilt is another one of those things that tends to sink in the body. It tends to sink in the pelvis, and it can cause a lot of problems, especially reproductive system ones, whether that's menstrual cramps or whether that's prostate inflammation or ovarian cysts, things that get stuck in the lower body, even constipation, are issues that can oftentimes be related to guilt because it's heavy, it sinks, it has an energy that is that's downward moving. And so whether that's, if you just take a moment and experience that sensation of guilt as a weight, it's like you may notice that your chest starts to collapse inward. You might notice that there is a heavy feeling in the abdomen or sinking into the pelvis. And in Chinese medicine, the stagnation of energy, right, so it's just energetic sensation. There's not anything physical that's pulling you down. It's just a feeling, right? But the fact that you're probably able to notice that just by conjuring up or imagining what it's like to feel guilty, qi stagnating in a particular area over time leads to the stagnation of actual stuff, right, what we call blood, capital B, blood, and fluids. And that stagnation is not a good thing, right? Every part of our body needs to be nourished by adequate circulation of qi and blood. So that idea of something becoming heavy and kind of congealing in a particular area can, kind of creates this energetic pattern in the body that will then sometimes be followed by actual physical changes. Does that make sense?
It really does, because what you're talking about is not allowing your body to flow as it normally should. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We often use the analogy of a river to explain the flow of energy in the body, that basically, if we look at, the two simplest problems that someone can have going on is energy not flowing well through the channels, through the meridians that carry it around the body. That if there's a blockage in that energy flow, it's like a logjam in a river, where on one side the river is flooding and overflowing its banks and drowning the surrounding area and turning it into marsh. And on the other side, the fish are flopping around because they don't have any water and the plants are dying. And so the idea is that when we remove a blockage of energy, qi stagnation, whether that's caused by physical trauma or you hurt your back or whatever, that can create qi stagnation. Emotional stagnation also creates its own kind of qi stagnation. And restoring that free flow means that both of those problems go away, both the excess on one side and the deficiency on the other, so that everything gets better.
Yeah, it's so fascinating when you bring something like that up. For instance, guilt. That's one of those emotions that we feel that we must more or less impose on ourselves for maybe coming up short or having a regret because we didn't do a certain thing a way that we should have, just all these different reasons. And I find that such an interesting emotion, why we even have it or where this came from in the first place. Is it something that it's a learned behavior to feel guilty versus is it natural? Things
right.
like that. And, and another one I think of, too, that people really hold on to, especially when you're out there in traffic, is that of worry. Here's
yes.
one people really hold on to. And I remember back in my 20s when there was something pretty rough going on in my life, and a friend of mine says, look, don't worry over things that you can't control. And I really started thinking about that quite a bit. And then I realized, how often we worry about things that haven't happened yet.
Exactly.
And you realize if you could just stop for a minute and say, but where am I now and what's happening right now in this moment, it's pretty amazing. You take a few deep breaths in and out, you realize, it's not so bad right now at this moment, and why don't I just deal with that when the time comes? And you think, how does worry really serve you?
Right.
Why do we hold on to it?
Right. Well, I actually have a blog post about points for worry as well, if you dig back in there. This is a few months ago. Worry can be a response to trying to keep ourselves safe by time traveling, basically, by going into the future. And is that saying, worry is like paying interest on a debt you don't owe. I'm not sure who said that, but I love that one. And recognizing that, it is being able to, like, if you are dealing with worry, if that's something that is coming up for your mind, being able to meet that worry, first of all, with compassion, to be able to notice that you're doing it, and to thank that part of you that thinks that you need to be kept safe from all possible futures. But then, using the breath to ground yourself in the present moment, because you can't breathe for the future, right? You're like, the breathing
Right.
can only happen in the now. And recognizing this is the moment that I can actually control, and, in as much as I can control anything. But this is the moment where I can act and where I can do something, and being able to bring yourself back to that. But worry, we connect with the spleen in Chinese medicine. And so the spleen, it digests our lives. It also digests our thoughts. And so being able to being stuck in the same repetitive thought or obsessive thinking could actually be treated with the same acupoints that we might treat for helping with digestion on a physical level, points like that deal with the spleen and stomach.
It's just so fascinating to realize that the simplest things we can do that are available to all of us is just taking a little bit of time for self-awareness, and as we've been talking about, the G of self-compassion. Pretty important stuff there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just that it's so, when we think about that from Chinese medicine, we understand that the points are really these portals to the body, right? There are these ways in that we have, kind of like if we've got, a keyboard, that we can play these different notes by accessing different points in the body, and we can make these chords that the body has to listen to. And by the body, I mean, of course, the body and mind, because it's all energy. It's all part of the same ecosystem. And so being able to access those points, whether we're doing it through self-massage or whether, one of my favorite ways of teaching people how to do it is with essential oils, that dropping essential oils on a point is like adding the herbal component to it, right? Adding the fragrance energetics, because just like emotions, scent can move upward or downward or inward or outward, and it can either scatter and disperse or consolidate and strengthen, and that we can actually use essential oils on points and get a really similar kind of effect to either to massage or to acupuncture, which is really empowering for people to realize that when you couple the energetics of a plant with the energetics that is sort of intrinsic to a specific key on the keyboard or a point on the body, that we're able to really bypass the rational mind and go kind of to the level of programming and really change things.
Fascinating stuff. Now, I know that you have a retreat coming up at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, which is located in Oregon. Tell our listeners what they can expect and why this is a don't-miss event.
The retreat is going to be super fun. First of all, just giving people an experience of sweetness, of being kind to themselves. That's my intention for the weekend. And Brighton Bush is an amazing place up in the Oregon Cascades where you're fed this beautiful food and you can soak in hot springs and you don't have to get out of your car, or you don't ever have to get in your car, and it's like old growth forest and nature and beautiful. So you have kind of the energies of nature that we get to be in touch with. The actual content of what I'll be presenting is, first of all, a Qigong form, a way of working with our breath and our movement and our intention to cultivate self-compassion. So a particular meditation that helps to kind of open the heart to self-compassion. So this is kind of like a little 15-minute routine, like for people who might have trouble with meditating by sitting still, and for whom yoga might be either too strenuous or daunting. Qigong is just a really sweet spot in the middle. That it's a body-mind practice that has a particular energetic focus, in this case on self-compassion. So we'll be playing with seated Qigong, but as well as standing Qigong. We'll also be playing with some of these, people will learn specific acupoints and specific essential oils and ways of working with them so that they can really kind of address their own limiting beliefs that might keep them stuck in these patterns, whether they're like have a fierce inner critic, or whether they're a hard driver, or whether they are just giving themselves away. You know, like that these are energies of different elements, and so we'll kind of go into seeing ourselves in a new way, learning about our own tendencies and what we can do to counterbalance them. Also thinking about bringing mindfulness. We'll be practicing mindfulness. We'll be practicing breathing. We'll be practicing how to relax the nervous system and be able to bring that same kindness we bring to others to ourselves.
Fascinating stuff. And again, for the listeners out there, you can discover more by visiting Brodie at BrodieWelch.com. That is BrodieWelch.com. What is the final thought you'd like to leave for our listeners today? Something they can take away and maybe start thinking and feeling a difference in their health immediately that they can do?
Well, probably the easiest thing is to give yourself, just as you make time to eat 3 times a day, hopefully, that giving yourself a few minutes, a few times a day to breathe yourself, to just take a breath inventory, notice how you're breathing, and to invite your breath to become longer, slower, deeper, and more gentle. And watch what happens to your emotional body as a result of that, and watch what happens to your mind. Because a lot of times it's like the fastest way to affect our mind is with our breath. And for most of us, our lives are moving really fast, and one of the sweetest things we can do for ourselves is periodically throughout the day, not just confined to a morning practice, is just to check in and see how you're doing. How's your nervous system? How's your breath? And invite it to move to a state of relaxation and ease.
It also seems to be one of those immediate things that if you're in a situation where you're worried about an outcome or a potential something or other, take a few deep breaths and just relax and ask yourself the question, but where am I right now? And I would think that would help quite a bit too as well.
Absolutely. If people need a little help or want to be walked through a guided breathing meditation, they can grab one on my website, BrodieWelch.com /breathing-break. And they can download this meditation and use it anytime. They can also get 5 ways to hack your nervous system. It's a 30-minute audio class that I taught, and that's also available. That's just a few other little biohacks, ways of using the body to affect the mind that can be done easily and quickly, sprinkled throughout the day.
Not to mention they can discover Stop Saying I'm Fine plus 5 more ways to make pain suck less. And I think we all want to learn how to do something like that, don't we?
Everybody is in pain at times. So yes, and again, self-compassion is the key to so many of these ways in.
I'll tell you, for the listeners out there, certainly visit her at her website, BrodieWelch.com, and especially the blog. I was looking through some of that just yesterday, in fact, and I was realizing, boy, you've got a lot of great information here on your website that, again, it allows people to see I can take care of a lot of this, on my own, but it certainly would also be great to have a wonderful coach like yourself that can kind of guide me in case I feel a little stuck.
Absolutely. Having, by and large, so much of us know what to do, but we have a hard time implementing it. And that's where, going on a retreat can be an amazing reset button. Having an experienced guide helping you make changes in your own life, and also a community, right? Other people with like-minded goals. So definitely, launching group classes in the future. That's certainly going to be an ongoing focus for me, but really empowering people and really trying to change the culture to make it one that isn't so yang addicted, where we can be self-compassionate, and where people, you can say like, yeah, I did nothing this afternoon, and have people say like, good for you, instead of, sort of that wrestling with judgment as, lazy or somehow like immoral. So yeah, it's definitely, it's hard to go it alone. It's hard to go against the dominant cultural tendencies by yourself. And so, yeah, that's part of my work in the world, is to help people step into being able to really live the lives they want to live.
Fascinating stuff. Brodie, it's been a real pleasure to have you here on the program. I know that our listeners have thoroughly have the door open for ways they can actually change their emotional health, as well as have a lot more self-compassion, and I want to thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to all of you for listening.
You bet. And again, for our listeners out there, you can find out more by going to BrodyWelch.com, and I know you'll really enjoy what you see there. And Brody, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can discover more also by finding us out at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We'll have some links up for you so you can discover more as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.